So my paper is titled Textures of Indian Memory. On a recent trip to Delhi to research on the sites of partition memory, I resolved to visit Purana Killa, or Old Fort, which is the site where much Indian political history took place. Purana Killa was built on the remnants of Indraprastha, the capital city of the Pandava rulers from the Mahabharata. Later, Humayun, the second Mughal emperor, located his capital, Din Pana, here. Other rulers followed, using this location as their site of rule, until the British developed New Delhi as the capital of British India. Even then, Purana Killa played a role as Edwin Lutyens used it to align the central vista in New Delhi. Used Purana Killa to align the central vista in New Delhi Kingsway, now called Rajpath. Notwithstanding the development of Lutyens' Delhi, this city has been aesthetically and architecturally also a Muslim city for a long time, as it had been the capital for the Mughal rulers as well as 5 other previous Muslim dynasties. Now it is the capital of Hindu India, even though constitutionally we are secular. Street names have now changed by and large in an attempt to erase memories of our Islamic or British past and to reflect the current Hindu reality. And how was this new incarnation of Delhi affect? How did this new... And how has this new incarnation of Delhi affected Purana Killa? In 1947, with the Indian partition, this fort, along with Humayun's tomb, became one of 2 refugee camps for Delhi Muslims fleeing to Pakistan. 150,000 to 200,000 Delhi Muslims, including 12,000 civil servants, took refuge in Purana Killa. In 1948, the camp was eventually closed with their transportation to Pakistan. Purana Killa is not politically charged in the same way anymore, as now there's only the occasional theatre production that takes place there. In April 2016, when I visited it, there were no vestiges of the refugee camp. Now the grounds were being used by young lovers trying to get privacy from their families, holding hands under the trees and walking around. There is a museum within the fort which highlights Indraprastha, drawing attention to the fact how each regime of power attempts to forget the memories of their predecessors. How do the layers of history sedimented within a place reveal themselves? Are some bits of it forgotten or irrecoverable? How is the memory of a place recuperated? 3 different movements need to be made for the development of this paper. 1, examining the relationship between place and memories. Do places contain their inhabitants' memories? 2, how does affect manifest itself in sites of memory? And finally, 3, how do these affective memories remanifest themselves in the present? Indeed, it is a commonplace to suggest that there is a close imbrication of these 3 terms, in that bodies shape and are shaped by memories, as much as these 2 terms, bodies and memories, are affected by place. Kant posits that our awareness of the binary opposites up, down, front, back, right, left, and inside, outside, which are all central to our orientation in space, emerges from our body. Kant also points out that our comprehension of directionality, left from right, up from down, for instance, and a sense of the world surrounding us, and the knowledge within which we perceive them, require the mediation of our bodies. Thus, bodies, spatial orientations, place, history, and memory, and knowledge are all connected in this pedestrianization of identity. Our bodies give us a sense of direction, and as we walk around places, we memorize the details of what needs to be remembered and what they mean to gain a sense of who and where we are through this process. If individual bodily identity is shaped in affirmative or disruptive ways by places and the past, Does the national body politic also get affected in similar ways? How does the effective memory of a nation's people get recorded beyond the writing of history and the collection of archival material? And how is place tied to these memories? Though both are shaped by a negotiation between remembering and forgetting, the difference between history and affective memory is that the former consciously shapes and trains its citizens in how to recollect the past, whereas the latter repeats the past in the everyday present. Memory is often bodily in that they follow certain routines and harbor certain memories. Because memories tend to engage all the senses, often their recall elicits some strong physical responses. For instance, certain smells or songs recall instantly a sense of the past, feelings of well-being or trauma. Questions dealt with here will be, how is partition remembered or deliberately relegated to a national amnesia in India? How is the loss of ancestral memories, which are firmly located in specific places, forgotten or remembered? How is the filtering, withholding, and construction of memory shaped by the various sites that refer to partition? I'll examine one sensory site of memory in India, Chandigarh, the post-independence city, which was built as the new capital of Punjab because Lahore, the previous capital, had fallen on the Pakistan side of the border. By focusing on this site, I want to underscore the affects of partition, and not as it was back in 1947, but rather as they have continued to haunt the nation right into the present. For this, I'm particularly influenced by Pierre Nora's work on lieux de mémoire, which means sites or places of memory, which represented the use of places and the different ways people identified with their nation. For him, people remembered their past through monuments, names of streets, flags, and institutions, among other material sites. Thus, Nora's work makes explicit the relationship between memory and material remnants of the national past. Placing memory. Amongst many, there are two commonplace assumptions about place which both follow different intellectual trajectories. First, in subjects like geology or physical geography, place is perceived to be either equivalent to the environment, a sum total of its parts, or secondly, especially in the humanities and social sciences, it is understood to be entirely a product of human experience with no intrinsic meaning unto itself. In this, the value and nostalgic attachments that the notion of place holds for us and its role in the construction of identity takes it beyond an empirical idea. It is this latter view of place that has been central to memory studies, especially those that have been developed in the wake of Maurice Halbwach's work. For Halbwach's, memory is social, and it is only in social context that we can remember, as it recuperates memory and also gives meaning to them. Memories of the past are directly related to a system of ideas and events of which we are members in the present. Halbwach's work also influenced that of Pierre Nora, who in his 7 volumes Lieux de Mémoire project between 1984 and 1992 posited that certain sites had the ability to evoke emotional affect, which were directly connected to the recuperation of certain forms of memory as well as views of the nation. Nora suggested that these sites of memory were central to remembering because with the onset of modernity, globalization, massification, and democratization, the collective memory of people had withered away and modern media had taken its place. For him, this new form of memory, or lieu de mémoire, had evolved because of the disappearance of the milieu de mémoire, which were the real environments of memory. Lieu de mémoire required the creation of archives, the maintenance of anniversaries, the organization of celebrations, and the like for memory to prevail, as without them history would sweep away the specificity of memories. Thus, lieu de mémoire expands our understanding of what sites are. They are places and things that allow for the resurfacing of affective memories. Nora states that they are the moments of history torn away from the movements of history, then returned, no longer quite life, not yet death, like shells on the shore when the sea of living memory has receded. Nora's focus on sites which function as the repositories of memory intersected with a phenomenological frame proves fascinating, as this intersection not only unites memory with place, but also factors in the experientiality of these with bodily identity. Thus, all three, memory, place, and identity, are tightly imbricated, such that the body and its identity is always a composite of place and memory. Merleau-Ponty's analysis of Paris suggests such an imbrication in that for him, Paris is not a sum of its parts, but rather, quote, its modalities are always an expression of the total life of the subject, the energy with which he tends towards a future through his body and his world, unquote. Dylan Trigg suggests that affect is a spark that ignites between the place and the subject. For instance, an agoraphobic anxiety of public spaces is caused only through a spark between the city and the agoraphobic subject, as anxiety is neither intrinsic to the said subject or to the city, but only through this constitutive spark is the city experienced as such. From a phenomenological perspective, then, place is more than the environment or the meanings projected onto it by people or history or memory. It is also to be understood experientially, as well as affectively and with particularity. It is affective in the sense that our body's perception of a place becomes the way we apprehend it. Consider what happens to a 1947 refugee fleeing India for Pakistan, or the refugee fleeing Pakistan for India. What was once dear and familiar as home with family memories and a sense of belonging as the space of one's ancestor is now fraught with danger for one's life and has become unfamiliar, resulting in the skewing of the notions of home. Place is also particular in that our relationship with it is unique. In the case of the Hindu or Sikh refugee fleeing Lahore, now in Pakistan, their relationship to it is both the sense of belonging and unbelonging, unique to that city. Moving to India now also produces this strange sense of forcible belonging and an emotional unbelonging, as it was not the land of the ancestral memories. While such a phenomenological reading of place seems to focus on the individual's relationship to it, how do places generate a group affect? How does individual memory become public memory? Whilst individual memory is specific and anchored within lived experience, public memory belongs to the realm of history. Here, memory is located and interpreted as being external to any individual subject, and public memory belongs to a public past, which, though external to the subject, yet gives a social, historical, and cultural meaning to the subject. This public history is commemorated not only in the collective memories of people, but also in archives, libraries, and monuments, and it is to this last that we will focus our attention in the next section of the paper. However, a caveat. As Trigg points out, monuments that represent a spatialization of the past carry within them a sentiment broader than the idiosyncrasies of the object representing that remembered past. Or to put it another way, they are subject to the vagaries of time, taste, and interpretations. In sum, first, notwithstanding the location of group or collective memory within history, the very nature of memories also suggests the restless multiplicity of coexisting versions, the recovery of the past in the present and the present in the past, imaginings, replications, and interpretations. Second, even collective memories are carried corporeally in repetition, voice, affect, and engagement amongst individuals, nations, sites, objects, and images. Third, the concepts of both monuments and memories suggest a survival and a living on, especially through change. By remembering an event of heightened proportions, such as the 1947 partition, we simultaneously invoke a broader range of properties, places, and objects that remain explicated in the event. Chandigarh. Chandigarh was the city that was developed with the express purpose of obliterating the memory of the partition. Yet ironically, it is the only city in South Asia that has a monument, and I'm not talking about the Partition Museum because that's a recent one that has appeared. So it's the only city in South Asia that has a monument to this cataclysmic event. In Oblivion, Marc Augé insists that, quote, one must know how to forget in order to taste the full flavor of the present, of the moment, of expectation. Memory itself needs forgetfulness, unquote. However, as Paul Connerton points out, all beginnings contain an element of recollection. The absolutely new is inconceivable because in all modes of experience, we always base our particular experience on a prior context in order to ensure that they are intelligible at all. How does the city of the future, the city that demanded a new beginning, carry memories of the past? When the state of Punjab was partitioned, the capital city Lahore had become part of Pakistan. East Punjab, that had been apportioned to India, now needed to have a new capital. Since Punjab was at the border between the two newly formed nations running through it, the state was flooded with refugees. Indeed, all the towns of East Punjab had doubled in population with the partition, though the infrastructure such as roads, drainage, water supply, schools, and hospitals were woefully inadequate to accommodate the large numbers of refugees. The initial plans to build a city for 150,000 people with the capacity for future expansion was drawn by two American architects. The project was subsequently taken over by Le Corbusier, the Swiss-French architect, and the city was built between 1951 to the present. The only city built on a grid pattern in India, Chandigarh is divided into sectors with the capital complex located in Sector 1. For Corbusier, the city was a metaphor for the human body, and you can see that. There's the head on top, and then the stick body, and the hands and the legs of it. The city was a metaphor for the human body, with the capital complex at the head, the city center at the heart, and the work area in Sector 17 functioning like the limbs. The first Prime Minister of India, Nehru, decided that Chandigarh, the new capital of Indian Punjab, was to be a glorious stage set where the tableau of state might be enacted. He said, "Let this be a new town, symbolic of the freedom of India, unfettered by the traditions of the past, an expression of the nation's faith in the future." In April 2016, I paid a visit to Chandigarh, a city I had never seen before. Chandigarh was unlike other Indian cities with wide roads, systematic numbering, green traffic islands, and gardens everywhere. The grid city patterns permits a certain constant sense of direction to the directionally challenged, such as me. However, the similarity of vast numbers of buildings simultaneously seemed to disorient me. If I were ever to stop walking to take a look around, did I not pass that building just now, or was it another one? In which direction had I been walking? It is a capital complex in Sector 1, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, that is the most visited by tourists in Chandigarh, as it was designed and planned by Corbusier with magnificent but unusual buildings for the Secretariat, the Assembly, the High Court, the Museum of Knowledge, and the Open Hand Museum, amongst others. Included in the complex are the Martyrs Monument, which I will discuss shortly, and the Tower of Shadows, an abstraction of Brise Soleil. The capital complex is still in the process of being completed, as the Museum of Knowledge, along with the geometric hill and the Martyrs Monument, remain unfinished. Since terrorists attacked the Assembly building a few years ago, any visitor to the capital complex requires police permission before walking to the Secretariat, an experience that requires you to walk from the tourist office through a walkway and onto a bridge before you suddenly come upon the magnificent, breathtaking, open-hand monument designed and gifted to Chandigarh by Corbusier that faces the plaza and is profiled against the mountains. The capital complex, a mix of remarkable buildings and of beautifully modulated spaces, is meant to promenade in, to be impressed, to be amazed. And this one, the next one. How then can we interpret Chandigarh, and more importantly, the capital complex, within the frames of affect and bodily memory? It is precisely the modernist style of buildings, the grid patterns of streets, the wide roads in the spread out city made for driving rather than walking, that established Chandigarh as a place where, without memories of the wretched past of a colonized India or the anguish of partition. In fact, nothing remains of the 26 villages that were erased to facilitate the establishment and development of Chandigarh. The capital complex too, with its modernist style that does not resemble in the least the official buildings of other Indian cities, establishes its newness, the hope for the future. The primary material with which most of Chandigarh is built including the Capitol complex, is affordable concrete rather than marble, to signify not only the humble monetary beginnings of independent India, but also its post-colonial state, in which investments needed to be made on people and underdeveloped infrastructure, and not on grandiose buildings. These, and in many other ways, Chandigarh hails the future, the modern, the hopes of India to transform from poverty and wretchedness to the pragmatic and to take its place amongst other developed nations. But yet, there is one reference to the past in this city that signifies the absence of the past and memories. As mentioned before, until recently, the only monument to date commemorating the trauma of the 1947 partition lies in Chandigarh, right at the heart of the Capitol complex. The Martyrs Monument, built with Chandigarh's favorite material, concrete, consists of a slowly inclining ramp. Please show the next picture, please. The slowly inclining ramp, which has cut within it some rectangular peepholes. The ramp descends into a sheltered space with a nook which is meant to eventually contain sculptures of an abstracted body and other forms. But this monument is yet to be completed. On the grey concrete wall, there are two sculptural forms, one on each wall, of an Ashoka chakra, or a wheel with 24 spokes, and another of an Indian swastika. The Ashoka chakra mirrors the Indian flag, and so on. How does the partition function phenomenologically in Martyrs Monument? Its location diagonally opposite the more imposing Tower of Shadows and to the side of the Assembly building with its magnificent colorful doors designed by Corbusier results in your eyes being drawn not to the Martyrs Monument, but to these two other buildings. As you can approach these buildings only on foot, the plaza upon which this monument is located functions as the vast forecourt to the more important and impressive Assembly building. The Martyrs Monument is discreet, sparse, and completely different in its grey concrete simplicity. Rather than being a place in its own right, you have to make an effort to notice and approach it. Walking on the gentle slope, which is part of the monument and which does not lead you to anywhere particular, you notice the disruption of the constant movement that envelops the Assembly building, with Assembly members of two governments and guards walking to and fro into a silence that descends onto the person walking on the Martyrs Monument. This silence enveloping you, walking on the gentle slope and gentle descent towards blank walls, memories of the violent past of partition is allowed to surface. It is this difference of the monument, its plain appearance at a difference from the other, more striking buildings, that elicits the silent present, refocusing and demanding our attention. The silence itself, as much as the monument, is a commemoration of the millions that lost their lives, their homes, and their livelihood in the partition violence. The silence, a ceasing of movement, noise, and time, allows for a new temporality, not partition as it had been, but what it means in the present. Furthermore, this moment of commemoration also suspends the present moment. The busyness of the Assembly building and the past unfolds and unfurls in the present. The Martyrs Monument is definitely not to function as a mere foil to the more eye-catching buildings. Its very structure to frame the workaday world of the Assembly building while simultaneously to bring about a memory independent of that world establishes the deliberate significance of the building. Thus, the structure of the monument elicits silence, memory, commemoration, and history. But does the Martyrs Monument allow for the free surfacing of memory? Pierre Nora states, the most fundamental purpose of the lieu de mémoire is to stop time, to block the work of forgetting, to establish a state of things, to immortalize death, to materialize the immaterial. All this to capture a maximum of meaning in the fewest of signs. It is also clear that lieu de mémoire only exists because of their capacity for metamorphosis, an endless recycling of their meaning, and an unpredictable proliferation of their ramifications, unquote. If lieu de mémoire cannot be pinned down in their meanings because of their tendency to metamorphise, along with the slight shifts in meaning that any recycling brings about, what else can be said about the Martyrs Monument? I suggest that the recuperation of memory that it allows is not ideologically free or unbound, but is a mediated one through nationalistic discourse, as is evident in the sculptural forms, the Ashoka Chakra and the Indian swastika, the one and the next one. On the walls of the monument. The Ashoka Chakra, the 24-spoked wheel, is a reference I had to explain this to Western audiences as well, reference to ancient India and the edicts of Emperor Ashoka, signifying the wheel of eternal law. The adjoining sculptural form of the Indian swastika is a reference to Vishnu. In short, the partition monument seems to be not just about the event, or even the victims or refugees, but the nation state and its losses, which professes itself to be dominantly Hindu. In not including either Sikh or Muslim grief at the losses of partition, the monument recuperates a very specific memory that is completely Hindu. Even the Ashoka Chakra, which does not refer to any specific denomination, but rather to the law, does not compensate for such a Hindu reading of the monument. And the next section, forgetting. I'll need about 10 minutes. Sorry? 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I've got to skip a lot of sections then. So what I'm going to do is to sort of start talking about what I've written for the rest of the paper. So in the rest of the paper, I talk about the significance of forgetting to the recuperation of memory. And so I compare this injunction of the partition within Indian nationalistic discourse, which is to not remember, because it coincides with the independence. And I compare it to the Holocaust, which is to always remember, and much of memory studies arises from the framework which has been forwarded by Holocaust studies. So so what I want to say is that so let me skip a couple of pages, and here I am, and I'll finish it in the time allocated. In their classic work, The Inability to Mourn, Alexander and Marguerite Mitscherlich examine post-war German denial of Nazi atrocities and suggest that the aggression displayed under National Socialism had transmuted and remanifested itself as an energetic restoration of Germany in the wake of its destruction in the Second World War. Their refusal to mourn, according to them, was caused by a defense mechanism that demanded an affective rupture with the past. The Mitscherlichs point out that the post-war Germany, in particular, refused to engage with its history of anti-Semitic violence in the Nazi era, preferring to perceive itself instead as the victim of the Allied forces that resulted in the partitioning of their country. This identification with the victim thus prevented the onset of guilt. Forgetting, one can see, requires an enormous amount of psychic energy, but the outcome of this amnesia was social cohesion and an ability to re-establish a legitimacy to a state where the basis of civil behavior had been destroyed by Nazi socialism. Ironically, in the German case, this forgetting becomes an antithesis of the injunction to remember brought about by the Holocaust. Contemporary Germany, post-reunification, especially Berlin, remembers the Holocaust and the Nazi past everywhere. The Holocaust Memorial, the Jewish Museum, the memorial to homosexuals persecuted under Nazism. And so I'm just going to say how then it negotiates, the Martyrs Monument negotiates between remembering and forgetting, in that it seemingly marks the memory of the 1947 partition losses and victims, albeit with a nationalist and a Hindu majority reading. Yet there is a simultaneous relegation of this memory to a memorial, to a shallow memory, so that details of the partition are not commemorated. The absence of Sikh and Muslim citizens whose losses were equally great, the conflation of partition victims with fallen soldiers in the war, the conflation of partition victims with freedom fighters, all embedded within the monument. Indeed, one could say that the ambivalent meaning of the Martyrs' Memorial lies within the intent to remember, but also the coaxing to forget. The shallow memory of the partition functions to prevent a cognitive dissonance in the newly formed Indian identity as a citizen of a secular state. If we keep the memory of the slaughter of Hindus and Sikhs by Muslims during the partition What does it mean for our Muslim citizens? Indeed, the periodic communal violence in contemporary India, especially between Hindus and Muslims, seems to suggest that notwithstanding the desire to relegate partition memory to becoming shallow memory, memory is slow to die without a trace. As Homi Bhabha describes in a different context, this ambivalence of memory is a product of that which is uttered interdicta, a discourse at the crossroads of what is known and permissible, and that which, though known, must be kept concealed, a discourse uttered between the lines, and as such both against the rules and within them. So what is uttered interdicta over here, especially in the Hindu-Muslim relationship, pre and post-partition? That we were the same once pre-1947, and now we are completely opposed to each other post-1947. It is love turned to hate, intimacy to unacceptable strangeness, family to foe. In his description of repressive erasure, Connaughton suggests that the explicit purpose of casting the memory of a person into oblivion has the effect of drawing attention to them, and so of causing them to be remembered. The requirement not to forget ends in reinforcing memory. For now, I want to ask if the inability to forget the partition is a form of counter-memory, a critique of totalizing public narratives. Within this notion, subordinated voices surface and lay bare the close links between and the seamless interpretations of the dominant order and their historical representations. We can say dominant indigenous history reinscribes a Hindu perspective through the two exclusionary sculptural forms in the narrative, to shape the narrative. However, the counter-memory emerges when we destabilize the power invested in dominant meanings and include these details that fall outside in its monotonous finality, which is revealed to be merely a fraction of the whole narrative of the Indian partition. Memories can thus be continually revised and promote competitive views of the past. And one more paragraph. Finally, I want to point out the obvious, that in the Martyrs' Memorial in Chandigarh, it is not that memory resurfaces from forgetting, but rather the reverse. It is forgetting that resurfaces, notwithstanding the efforts of maintaining memory via a memorial. I want to conclude this paper by suggesting an alternative reading to the memorial. The simultaneity of independence with partition has meant the relegation and subordination of partition discourse to that of decolonization, linking these two discourses metonymically in the South Asian imaginary in post-colonial Indian history. As is often the function of metonyms, the two terms establish a hierarchy, with one term being repressed by the visibility of the other, more prominent term. The visible term is often perceived to be the positive term, the other term being considered absent. However, notwithstanding its visibility, it is the repressed term that is generally privileged, in that it has a psychic investment in it, and remains hidden because it falls to the position of the signified, while the other functions as its signifier. What Chandigarh's monument reveals is that initially their relationship of contiguity gave the partition and independence value and significance and meaning to each other. Yet in a desire to forget, nationalistic determinations have privileged one concept over the other, psychically investing in it, trying to designate the less visible term to the bin of forgetfulness. Yet the partition functions as a counter-memory, a defiant remembering despite the erasures of history. Notwithstanding its relegation to being an absent term, memories of the partition are central to the reading of modern Indian identity. Indeed, the eruptions of memories of partition from time to time seems to suggest that that which seems forgotten in public memory is in fact perhaps a strong part at the core of Indian identity, far more than that of the discourse of independence struggle. Indeed, it is the suppression of memories that give it the power of periodic eruption. India might have only one monument to the partition, but the event will not completely disappear from the Indian imaginary. Thank you.